Well, friends, welcome to the Focus Weekly Devotions. My name is Tawanda Masango. I'm a staff worker with Focus at the National University of Science and Technology here in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. We've been going through this series in September where we are looking at how we can see the Old Testament pointing us to Jesus. And friends, today we are looking at Psalm 2, Jesus, the Son of God. You see, this psalm starts by painting this picture of rebellion, of rejection as these nations and their kings reject God and his king. You see, the people of Israel knew that their peace and their blessing were tied up with God's king, the one he chose, the one he anointed, starting with David and other kings that came after him. But here in this psalm, we get a picture of the nations around Israel and their kings and their people rising up against the Lord and his king. They have determined they do not want to be under the lordship of this king and his God. So let's first look at the king whom we reject. See, in verse 2, we hear these words: the kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. They don't want the Lord and his king to rule over them. They want to be independent. They want to do what they want with their lives, with their time, with their resources. Friends, isn't this the heart of our sin and rebellion as humanity? You see, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve decided that they wanted to rule their own lives, decided that they wanted to determine what is good and bad. They decided to forget about the Lord's instructions about which tree to eat and which tree not to eat. And they decided to take it in their own hands to determine what is good and bad. They were becoming like their own gods. They were becoming the ones to determine what goes and what doesn't go. Friends, now these kings and their people, they continue with the same rebellion. And even today, that is the true heart of our sin. But how does the Lord respond? Well, we are told in verse 4 of Psalm 2 that the Lord laughs. You see, this is a sign that the Lord is not shaken by this rebellion. He is not moved. He is laughing, a sign that he is in total control, no matter what it looks like. In verse 5, we hear the Lord speaks. He rebukes them in his anger. He terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. You see, the Lord responds to this rebellion, to this rejection, by confirming that he has appointed his own king. I read that this psalm was a coronation psalm. The words are recited each time a Davidic king was installed in Judah. But as you read this psalm further, you see that this king is not just a king for Israel. Read this word with me in verse 7 of Psalm 2. He said to me, you are my son, today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. See, do you hear these words being used to describe this king? He will be God's son, verse 7. He will inherit not just Israel, but the nations. He will bring God's judgment in verse 9. And he will bring God's blessing in verse 12. Friends, Israel had many kings, many great kings like David, who conquered God's enemies, like Solomon, who built the most amazing temple for God, like Josiah, who brought back the book of the law. But no king in Israel ever fulfilled the high expectations of Psalm 2. So the people of Israel kept on waiting for this Psalm 2 king until one day, a boy from Nazareth came to be baptized by John the Baptist. In Mark chapter 1 verse 11, we are told that a voice came from heaven saying, you are my beloved son. with you I am well pleased. Well, friends, many people today would agree that Jesus was a good teacher, that he did many amazing miracles, and many will agree that he lived a life that was sinless. You see, even Muslims would agree with you when you say those propositions. But guess what? The real question is, do you recognize Jesus as God's king, as God's son who was set by God on the throne to be king, to possess the nation, to rule over the nations? Do you recognize Jesus as your personal king in your life? The one you follow, the one you listen to? And are you ready to obey him even when it is not easy, even when it is not popular, even when it calls for you to make some sacrifices? Or like the kings of the nations in Psalm 2, you want to break free from Jesus' rule. You want to do what you want. You want to be your own king of your own life. Listen to this conclusion in Psalm 2, verses 11 and 12. Therefore, you kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the king with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss the Son, or he will be angry, and your way will lead to your destruction. For his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are those who take refuge in him. Friends, are you wise? Are you taking refuge in God's King, Jesus? Thank you, friends, and let us meet again next week.